Section 3. What survives the torture? They hung him by his wrists, arms tied behind his back. They lifted him up, and then they dropped him. Not all the way to the ground, just far enough that his full body weight wrenched his shoulders from their sockets. This is the strappado. 6 times they did this. 6 times his body became an instrument designed to shatter his will. He wrote a sonnet about it afterward, with humor, dark humor, but humor nonetheless, making jokes about his dislocated shoulders, about the degradation of imprisonment, about the absurdity of being tortured for a crime he didn't commit. Think about what that means. What kind of mind looks at that experience and decides to write poetry? What kind of person transforms pain into art before the pain has even fully subsided? This is what I mean by what survives the torture. They can take your career, your status, your freedom, your physical integrity. They can dislocate your shoulders and exile you from the only city you've ever loved. But they cannot touch certain things. And Machiavelli understood what those things were. Your capacity to think, your ability to observe, your power to transform experience into understanding. These survive. These are beyond fortune's reach. These are the dikes you build inside your own mind that no external force can breach. In that letter to Vittori, after describing his humiliating days selling firewood and gambling at the tavern, he writes about his evenings, about reading Dante and Petrarch, about studying ancient history, and he says, "I feed on the food that alone is mine and that I was born for." The food that alone is mine, the thing that cannot be taken, the core of identity that exists independent of circumstance. You have this too. Something in you that remains regardless of what happens to you. Most people never identify it because they never face sufficient catastrophe to strip away everything else. They mistake their circumstances for their identity, their job for their worth, their relationships for their meaning. Machiavelli had all that stripped away violently. And what remained was a mind that could analyze power dynamics, understand human nature, and write 2 books that would influence political thought for half a millennium. That's what survived the torture. That's what fortune couldn't touch. But there's something else that survived. Something people miss because they're so focused on the prince. His love for Florence, his belief in Republican virtue, his hope that someone, someday, would unify Italy and free it from foreign domination. The last chapter of The Prince is completely different from everything that comes before it. It's not cold analysis. It's not ruthless pragmatism. It's a passionate plea for someone to liberate Italy, to throw out the foreign invaders, to restore dignity to the Italian people. It's Machiavelli allowing himself to hope, allowing himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his writing could contribute to something larger than his own restoration. This is what survives torture when you're someone like Machiavelli. The ability to love something more than yourself, to care about something beyond your own immediate suffering, to maintain connection to a purpose larger than personal grievance. He could have written The Prince as pure revenge, as a guide to help tyrants be even more effective tyrants, so Florence would suffer under them. He could have used his knowledge to punish the city that exiled him. Instead, he tried to make whoever ruled Florence, even if it was the family that tortured him, rule well enough that Florence might flourish. This is sophisticated psychological survival. This is what separates trauma that destroys from trauma that transforms. The ability to hold both realities simultaneously. I was grievously harmed, and I still care about something beyond my harm. Most people can't do this. Most people who experience injustice become defined by their injustice. The wound becomes their identity. The pain becomes their narrative. They spend the rest of their lives proving how damaged they are, how wronged they were, how much they're owed. Machiavelli spent 3 weeks in prison being tortured. Then he spent the rest of his life trying to figure out how to prevent the conditions that create such injustice. Not by denying what happened to him, but by analyzing the power structures that made it possible, by understanding the mechanisms, by offering insights that might help others avoid similar catastrophes. The dikes you build in your own mind, these are what survive. Your ability to observe without being destroyed by what you observe. Your capacity to analyze without drowning in bitterness. Your skill at transforming personal pain into universal insight. Every evening, Machiavelli performed his ritual, took off his muddy peasant clothes, put on his courtly garments, entered his study, and became again who he actually was. Not the exile, not the victim, but the philosopher, the analyst, the servant of Florence trying to be useful even from exile. This is active psychological resistance to trauma, the refusal to let circumstances define consciousness, the maintenance of identity independent of situation. The practice of remembering who you are when everything external is telling you you're nothing. You need this ritual, your own version of it. The daily practice that reminds you of what cannot be taken. The thing you do that reconnects you to the part of yourself that exists beyond your current struggles. The space you create where you're not defined by what's happening to you, but by who you choose to remain despite what's happening to you. For Machiavelli, it was reading and writing. For you, it might be something else entirely, but you need it, because without it, trauma makes you smaller. With it, trauma becomes raw material for growth. There's a concept in his work that people misunderstand: necessità. Necessity. He talks about how necessity can be used to create virtue, how constraints force innovation, how crisis reveals capacity. This isn't naive optimism. It's not everything happens for a reason. It's recognition that pressure can transform you if you're willing to be transformed rather than just crushed. The strappado was necessity. Exile was necessity. Loss of career, status, relevance, all necessity. And from that necessity, Machiavelli produced work that has outlasted the Medici, outlasted Florence, outlasted the entire political system he was trying to navigate. What necessity are you facing right now? What pressure is crushing you? What circumstance is demanding transformation? You can resist it, can spend your energy fighting reality, can exhaust yourself insisting things should be different than they are. Or you can do what Machiavelli did: accept the necessity, analyze it, understand it, and use it to build something that can't be taken from you. The torture revealed what was permanent and what was provisional. Before the arrest, Machiavelli was his job. He was the second chancellor. He was the diplomatic negotiator. He was his function in the Florentine state. And when they took that function away, he thought he had nothing left. But in that cell, hanging by his wrists, he discovered what actually remained: his mind, his capacity to analyze, his love for Florence, his understanding of power, his ability to write. These weren't dependent on his position. These were him, the permanent self underneath the provisional roles. You discover this in crisis, when they fire you, when they leave you, when your health fails, when everything you thought defined you evaporates. And in that terrifying void, you find out what's actually real about you, what's substantial, what survives. Most people find almost nothing, because they never built anything substantial. They only built circumstances. They only cultivated provisional selves. So when circumstances change, they collapse. Machiavelli built something solid. Not his career, that was taken. Not his status, that was destroyed. But his capacity to think clearly about power. That was his. That was permanent. That was the food he was born for. And from his farm, in exile, in humiliation, with ruined shoulders and no prospects, he wrote 2 books that would reshape how humanity understands politics. Because what they took from him was never what mattered. What mattered survived the torture. This is the test you're facing. Not literal torture, probably, but the metaphorical version. The circumstances that strip away your provisional identities. The losses that reveal what's actually substantial about you. The pressure that shows you whether you built on rock or sand. Machiavelli passed the test. Not by maintaining his position, he lost that. Not by avoiding pain, he endured it. But by discovering that what he valued most about himself was something they could never take. The question is, what about you survives? When they take the role, the relationship, the status, the comfort, what's left? Is there anything permanent? Or have you been living entirely in the provisional? You find out in the torture, and the torture is coming. It's always coming. Fortune guarantees it. The only question is whether you've built the internal dikes that will allow something essential to survive the flood.
Section 4. The gift that looks like poison. So now we arrive at the difficult part. The part where you have to decide what to do with everything you've learned. Because Machiavelli's insights are genuinely dangerous. Not to society. Society has survived them for 5 centuries. Dangerous to you. To your self-conception. To the comfortable narratives you've been using to avoid responsibility for your own powerlessness. You can read The Prince and become cynical. Decide that since everyone's manipulative, you might as well be too. That since virtue isn't rewarded, you should abandon it entirely. That since the universe is amoral, nothing matters. This is the poison. This is what happens when you take Machiavelli's observations and use them as permission to become what you resent. Or you can take the gift, the real gift, the one that looks like poison until you understand it. The gift is this: now you can see the game. Now you understand the rules that everyone else has been playing by while pretending they don't exist. Now you're no longer operating from a child's understanding of how the world works. And from that clarity, from that mature vision, you can make actual choices instead of just being acted upon. Machiavelli finished The Prince around Christmas 1513, 8 months after his torture. He sent the manuscript to people who might advocate for him with the Medici, hoping it would demonstrate his value, hoping it would get him back into government. It didn't work, not immediately. He remained in exile for years, but he kept writing. The discourses on Livy, the art of war, plays, including the comedy Mandragola, poetry, the Florentine histories.
He didn't stop producing just because his immediate goal failed. He didn't surrender to bitterness just because his circumstances didn't improve. This is what the gift looks like when you actually receive it. You keep working. You keep building. You keep trying to be useful to something larger than yourself. Not because you're guaranteed success, but because the alternative, surrendering to circumstance, becoming bitter, giving up on contribution, that's actual death. That's when fortune wins completely. Machiavelli eventually did return to some form of employment. In 1520, the Medici hired him to write the Florentine histories. Not the position he wanted, not the influence he deserved, but enough. Enough to keep contributing, enough to maintain connection to his city, enough to transform his experience into something useful for future generations. And then, in 1527, everything collapsed again. The Medici were expelled from Florence. The Republic was briefly restored, and Machiavelli, who had written The Prince for the Medici, was seen as a collaborator. The Republicans didn't trust him. The job he hoped to get, the revival of his old position, went to someone else. He died a month later, June 21st, 1527, 58 years old, having never fully recovered his position, having never seen his beloved republic truly restored, having died still semi-exiled from the political life that defined him. By every conventional measure, his life was a failure. He lost his career. He was tortured. He was exiled. His greatest work wasn't published during his lifetime. He died without vindication, without restoration, without seeing his advice implemented or his vision realized. And yet, 500 years later, we're still talking about him, still reading him, still grappling with his insights, still trying to understand power through the lens he created, still fighting about whether he was revealing truth or corrupting morality. This is the actual gift. Not success in your lifetime, not comfort, not external validation, but the capacity to see clearly and speak truthfully regardless of consequences. To build something substantial out of your suffering. To contribute understanding even when you're not rewarded for it. Machiavelli transformed his pain into insight, his torture into philosophy, his exile into literature, not because he was superhuman, but because he understood that the alternative, wasting his remaining years on bitterness and resentment, would mean fortune won completely, would mean his suffering was pure loss with no transformation. You're facing this choice right now, maybe not on Machiavelli's scale, but structurally it's the same choice. You've learned things through pain, through betrayal, through disappointment, through watching the world fail to match the narratives you were taught. You can either weaponize that knowledge to justify becoming worse, or you can alchemize it into something that helps others navigate what you navigated. The poison is using Machiavelli's observations as permission for cruelty, saying, "Since the world is ruthless, I'll be ruthless too. Since virtue isn't rewarded, I'll abandon virtue entirely. Since everyone's out for themselves, I'll stop caring about anything beyond my immediate interests." This is the childish reading. It's reaction, not response. It's letting your pain decide who you become. It's fortune winning twice, once by harming you, and again by turning you into someone who perpetuates that harm. The gift is understanding power, so you can defend what you actually value. Learning strategy, so you can protect the people and principles that matter to you.
Seeing manipulation so you're not controlled by it. Recognizing the game so you can play it consciously instead of being played unconsciously. Machiavelli loved Florence. That love survived the torture. That love survived the exile. That love survived knowing Florence would never love him back the way he loved it. And from that unrequited love, he wrote books trying to help Florence survive, trying to teach whoever would listen how to build stability, how to maintain liberty, how to defend against the forces that destroy republics. This is mature ethics. Not be nice and hope it works out, but understand reality deeply enough that you can actually accomplish good in a world that doesn't reward good intentions. The challenge for you is this: can you hold both truths simultaneously? Can you understand that power operates through mechanisms that are often amoral, while still choosing to deploy that power toward moral ends? Can you learn the tools of manipulation so you can defend against them without becoming manipulative yourself? Can you see clearly how the world actually works without letting that clarity destroy your capacity to care about how it should work? This is the razor's edge Machiavelli walked. This is what makes his work genuinely sophisticated rather than just cynical. He saw the machinery, he described it accurately, and he still believed something better was possible if people understood the machinery well enough to build something solid. In his famous letter, after describing his evening ritual, he writes, "For 4 hours I feel no boredom. I forget every worry. I do not fear poverty. Death does not frighten me. I transfer myself into them completely. Into the ancient thinkers, into the conversations across centuries, into a realm where truth matters more than circumstances, where understanding is the currency, where fortune cannot reach. This is the ultimate dike, the one built entirely in consciousness. The place where you're not defined by what happens to you, but by how you metabolize what happens to you. Where you transform suffering into wisdom instead of just carrying it as burden. Machiavelli is offering you this space, this ritual, this capacity, not as escapism. He still spent his days selling firewood and dealing with peasants, but as a foundation that circumstances cannot shake, as a core that remains stable while everything else fluctuates. You need this now more than ever, because you're living in your own version of Italian chaos, your own version of foreign invasions and collapsing certainties, your own moment when all the rules seem to be changing and nobody agrees on what's real anymore. The gift that looks like poison is this: you get to see clearly. You get to understand how power actually operates instead of how you wish it operated. You get to recognize fortune's patterns so you're not surprised when she turns. You get to build dikes before the flood instead of just praying the flood never comes. But with that gift comes responsibility. You can't claim innocence anymore. You can't pretend you don't understand. You can't hide behind comfortable illusions about fairness and justice and eventual reward for virtue. You have to choose, consciously, what you'll do with the clarity, whether you'll use it to protect or to exploit, whether you'll deploy it in service of something larger than yourself or just in service of your own advancement.
Whether you'll become someone who understands the machinery and uses it ethically, or someone who understands the machinery and uses it to justify cruelty. Machiavelli can't make that choice for you. He just shows you the machinery. What you build with that knowledge is yours. And here's the final truth, the one that completes the circle. Choosing to use power ethically when you understand how easily it can be used unethically, that's actual virtue. The virtue that matters. Not the virtue of innocence, which is just ignorance wearing a costume, but the virtue of knowledge, of choosing restraint when you understand temptation, of maintaining ethics when you've seen how easily ethics can be discarded.
This is what Machiavelli was. Not a monster, not a saint, but a human being who saw clearly, suffered deeply, and chose to contribute understanding rather than just accumulate resentment. Who loved something more than himself, even after that something tortured and exiled him. Who believed in human potential, even while documenting human darkness. The gift is the capacity to be like him. Not in the specifics, you're not writing political philosophy in Renaissance Italy, but in the essentials. Clear-eyed, strategic, ethical by choice rather than by ignorance, capable of holding complexity, willing to tell uncomfortable truths, committed to something larger than personal comfort. This is what survives fortune. Not your circumstances, not your status, not your reputation, but your capacity to see truly, act consciously, and build something meaningful despite knowing how easily everything can be destroyed. When Machiavelli died in 1527, he was buried in the church of Santa Croce in Florence. Hundreds of years later, they erected a monument to him there. It bears an inscription, Tanto nomini nullum par elogium. No eulogy would be adequate for such a great name. This is the irony. The man they exiled and tortured became one of Florence's most famous sons. The book they never let him publish during his lifetime became one of the most influential texts in Western thought. The name they turned into a synonym for evil became synonymous with understanding power. But Machiavelli doesn't care about his legacy. He's dead. The legacy is for you. The question is what you do with what he left behind. You came here because something in you knew it was time. Time to stop pretending the world is fair. Time to stop expecting virtue to be rewarded automatically. Time to understand why you keep losing to people who are less talented but more strategic. Time to learn how the game actually works so you can stop being played. Machiavelli has shown you the machinery of power, the dynamics of fortune, the necessity of building dikes, the performance of virtue, the economy of fear and love, the burden of necessary choices, the gift that looks like poison but is actually the only thing that can save you. Now you have to decide, are you going to take what you've learned and become bitter? Are you going to use this understanding as permission to abandon ethics? Are you going to weaponize this knowledge to justify harming others? Or are you going to do what Machiavelli did? Are you going to transform your pain into insight? Are you going to use your understanding to protect what you value? Are you going to build something that matters even when you're not guaranteed success? Are you going to love something more than yourself, even when it doesn't love you back? The torture reveals what survives. The exile shows what's permanent. The suffering demonstrates what you're actually made of. And what survives, what remains, what proves itself permanent, that's what fortune cannot touch. Machiavelli lost everything except his mind.
And with that mind, he built something that outlasted every power structure of his era. That's not consolation. That's not saying everything happens for a reason. That's saying when everything is taken, what you build from what remains defines whether fortune wins completely or whether you transform catastrophe into contribution. You're going to face your own version of the strappado, your own exile, your own moment when everything you built collapses. Fortune guarantees it. The only question is whether you've built the internal dikes that let something essential survive. Whether you've cultivated the capacity to see clearly even when seeing hurts. Whether you've maintained connection to something larger than your immediate circumstances. Machiavelli's final lesson is this: the world doesn't care about your suffering. Fortune doesn't care about your virtue. Power doesn't care about your intentions. But that doesn't mean your suffering is meaningless, your virtue is worthless, or your intentions don't matter. It means you have to care. You have to assign meaning. You have to practice virtue consciously. You have to act on your intentions strategically. No one else will do it for you. No cosmic force will reward you for your goodness. No divine justice will eventually balance the scales. There's just you, your choices, your capacity to transform experience into understanding, your willingness to build even when you know fortune can destroy it, your commitment to something beyond yourself even when yourself is all you can control. This is the gift. Not comfort, not certainty, not success, but agency. The terrible, beautiful freedom of seeing clearly and choosing consciously what you'll do with that sight. Machiavelli is dead. Florence is changed beyond recognition. The political systems he analyzed have all collapsed and been replaced. But the insights remain. The observations about human nature, about power, about fortune, about what it takes to build something durable in an uncertain world. These survive. And they survive because they're true. Not comfortable, not uplifting, not what you want to be true, but accurate, reliable, useful. The kind of truth that helps you navigate reality rather than just feel good about your ignorance. You have that truth now. You can't unknow it. You can't go back to comfortable delusions about fairness and automatic rewards for virtue. You've looked into Machiavelli's mirror. You've seen the machinery underneath the performance. You've recognized the game that's always been playing around you. What you do with that recognition is the only thing that matters. Whether fortune has won by showing you truth that destroys you, or whether you've won by transforming that truth into something that makes you stronger, wiser, more capable of protecting what you love. The evening ritual waits. The space where you take off the costume of your circumstances and put on the identity of who you actually are. Where you feed on the food that alone is yours. Where you enter into conversation with those who saw clearly before you and left their insights for you to build upon. Machiavelli is in that space, waiting to talk to you. Dead for 500 years, but more alive in his observations than most people are in their breathing. Ready to show you what he saw, ready to teach you what he learned. Ready to help you build the dikes before fortune floods everything you've built on hope instead of strategy. The torture is coming. The exile is inevitable. Fortune will turn, because fortune always turns. But what survives? What you build that cannot be taken. What you become that circumstances cannot diminish. What you understand that pain cannot erase. That's yours.
That's permanent. That's the victory over fortune that's actually available. Not avoiding the flood, but building something that survives it. If this message found you at the right moment, give this video a like. Comment below, "I see the patterns now," and subscribe for more deep psychological insights from MindX.